Hey everyone, welcome to the next episode out of 10 GTM. I'm your host Ross Rich, and today we have a very special guest. We have Karan Singh, the VP of Go-to-Market Strategy, RevOps, and Enablement at LaunchDarkly. Just a few roles, and appreciate him taking some time out of his busy day and week to chat with us today. Welcome.
Ross, happy to be here, pal. Looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Well, before we dive into things and talk about, the usual stuff we talk about here, the three key strategies to driving revenue execution excellence from your perspective, for the audience to get to know you a bit more and kind of why they should be taking your advice with your deep experience in the go-to-market landscape. Most recently, with Sapphire being a limited partner at Go-to-Market Fund and at a few, big names like Procore. Excited to hear a bit about your journey to LaunchDarkly and, how you ended up leading strategy, RevOps, and enablement.
Yeah, man. As you said, I'm our VP of RevOps Strategy Enablement at LaunchDarkly. It is a mouthful, but I promise it all connects together. But really, I've been a RevOps leader for a long time now. I like to tell people I got hit with a lucky stick in that I've had three organizations that I've been a part of now in the B2B SaaS landscape that went from sort of early stage, trying to figure out who they want to be when they grow up, all the way through a public event and what I call a forever company. Early days, it was at cybersecurity company ArcSight, which went public, was acquired by Hewlett Packard for 10x revenues. This was, by the way, Ross, perpetual software days, so 10x revenue multiples were like unheard of. And then
Yeah, that's not ARR. That's not SaaS
no,
multiple. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And then after that, Cloudera was early days there, which was in that machine learning data warehousing space. So think Databricks and Confluent and Snowflake. Before those, this was sort of the earlier stage
Yeah.
of. And so went through that journey with them as well. And then of course Procore, which was a vertical SaaS company. And when I joined, everyone said the same thing. It's like, you can't take a vertical SaaS company public. It's like, well, we did. And then I did. I took a foray into venture capital, as you mentioned. So I was a partner at Sapphire Ventures for a little bit before I got the itch to get back into operating. So now,
Once an operator, always an operator.
pretty much, man, I couldn't help it. I told my wife I think I'll be doing this until my last breath because I got very bored very quickly when I wasn't in there company building and scaling. So that's a little bit about me and my background, and I get to take all those learnings and bring them all together here at Launch Darkly and do it again.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'm excited for this one particularly because we have a lot of sales leaders here, CROs, SVPs of sales, and sometimes we dabble in the, strategy, ops, and enablement world. But I think it's really helpful for, especially those that are listening on the sales side to understand the perspective of their partners and to sometimes lean more into the operational excellence side of things and operating rhythms, which is where we're going to start with the first tip that we have here is around rituals and cadences. Something that, again, when you're focused on that next deal, that next sales hire is really hard to keep up with. So great to have partners like yourself to whip us into shape. So yeah, excited to hear why that's number one on your list and what you think about in terms of, how to create the right rituals and cadences at across the revenue organization.
Yeah, for sure. And by the way, just as a quick aside, Ross, before we get into it, I
Yeah.
joke with my CROs about this all the time, and folks that want to go into that CRO world as well, that revenue leadership world. It's like actually sales is one of the most interesting career arcs. You're really good at selling and carrying a bag, so they tell you to manage people. Well, you've never managed people before, but somehow they think that's the next step. Okay, once you get good at managing people, they tell you, hey, manage managers. And then for managed managers, they tell you to be a CRO. Well, actually, being a CRO is a lot more like being a revenue operator than it is carrying a bag,
Yes.
right? You have to worry
Yes.
about quota capacity, you have to worry about target setting, you have to worry about go-to-market strategy, all the things that I've been able to curate over my career as well. So I do think this will be a fun conversation because hopefully the aspiring revenue leaders out there think the same and recognize that knowing this part of the world is actually probably as critical to their success.
Yes. You need both sides, right? And you can't have, I think for both sides, it's very frustrating if you've been an employee at a company that has maybe a CRO that's purely sales and doesn't have a strong operating partner background, or vice versa. It's all about, the strategy and you don't have that leader that understands the execution and understands the importance of that customer engagement, all that kind of stuff. So I've seen both and experienced being on, the employee side of each. And it's really important, I think, to to know your strengths and weaknesses, and where you need a partner, maybe someone like yourself or vice versa, when you need to have someone who's, amazing on the field to make sure you're building the right stuff into the processes, right?
Right on, right on. Well, anyways, that was a little bit
Yep.
of an aside, but as you said, like driving execution excellence, we talked a little bit about this. Rituals and cadences to me are sort of the foundation of everything else we want to do in terms of great execution excellence, right?
Hmm.
The piece that most people, I think, not most people, a lot of folks neglect is that, look, they're always looking for that next great idea. How can we make the business better, bolder, greater through AI and through the next thing and the next thing, this new, unique, incremental solution?
Hmm.
Well, the reality is actually the foundation is what matters the most, right? So when I reflect on what's worked really well for me to drive execution excellence across revenue teams, it is those cadences and rituals. I'll give you a couple of examples. So one, weekly insights calls. So we do this here at LaunchDarkly, and it's something I've espoused in past lives too. Some people do MBRs and QBRs. It doesn't really matter. But do you have a cadence in place where you're looking at data, you're reviewing it with the leadership team to understand, well, what's working, what's not working with respect to how you're executing in the
Hmm.
business, right? If you have that ritual in place, actually you'd be surprised how much you learn because sellers will always and leaders will always start with the qualitative. But what happens if you start with the quantitative? Start with the
Mm.
numbers and then marry in the qualitative feedback that the sales leadership and CS leadership is offering. That I think has made a profound difference in sort of how you can keep the bar really high from an execution standpoint. And that's more internal, right? That's us operators working with sales leaders and CS leaders, but there's other rituals as well, right? What are the cadences that you use to engage with customers? What are the cadences you use for forecast excellence? There's all these different rituals and behaviors that you want to implement in every organization you're a part of, because then it becomes predictable, right?
Yep.
Everybody knows what's expected of them every week. And so, associated with that, they know the KPIs that they're responsible for as well. And so they stay on top of those, they stay on top of the rituals, and you look back 6 months, 12 months later, and you realize, boy, I think we're actually pretty good at what we do because of the consistency we've kept through these cadences. So to me, that's like if I had to pick one, and I know you're going to
Yeah,
give
I
me,
was going to ask, like, yeah, if you could pick maybe the top, two or three types of meetings, things to keep on track of, because, maybe someone doesn't have, a handful of those today. How would you prioritize, if you were to have those weekly or monthly meetings with your team?
yeah, great question. I will always, always, always prioritize customers first, right? So the number one meeting that I think matters is, and we call it our No Customer Left Behind initiative, which is like on a weekly basis. Do you have the CS and the sales teams coming together and reviewing all of our customers? When have we met with them last? When is the next renewal date? What is their level of adoption of the product that we've offered them? What is the next best action with them? Having that internal cadence to me is number one, right?
Yeah,
Keep in mind,
I
most of
love that.
your listeners are probably B2B SaaS companies, right? They're singing for their supper. It's not just sell them and then walk away. It's how do you make them
Yeah.
healthy? And so to me, that's probably the number one. And then two to me is, like I said, weekly insights reviews, but that's more oriented around pipeline generation. So, right, pipeline is oxygen for all SaaS organizations, and
Yep.
launch is no different. And so, how are you making sure you're constantly reviewing how your sellers are executing on pipeline generation? What have they learned? What does the data say about their conversion rates, et cetera, to see where we can get better? By the way, it's not a report the news exercise. It's to see like, well, who's doing well, who's not? How can we pair them together to learn from one another? What are the incremental initiatives we can drive to make everyone at parity at a healthy level with respect to PG?
Hmm.
That to me is critical as well. So those two are probably top of mind for me. And then there's a bunch of other things that I think we're all familiar with, forecast calls, deal reviews, et cetera, which every org should have. But those two are, I'd call, the highest leverage cadences and rituals.
I love that you start with the existing customers. I think this has, been such a huge trend the last few years of people understanding that, the world has changed and people aren't just auto renewing on everything anymore. And there's a microscope. And unless you're doing things very proactively, we're not just talking about that notification you get 2 to 3 months before a renewal comes up and scrambling, okay, who do I talk to now? It's, like you said, it's about the product adoption, it's about the different relationships, all of those pieces, and sales and CS being, hand in hand, and definitely was not the status quo, and really still isn't. But I'm seeing, great investment in that, as well as, like you said, pipeline. It's the unsexy things, the things that take a while. They're like lagging indicators, right? Like to your year, you're going to care about that in Q4, but how do you make sure that on week 1, week 2, week 3, and January, February, after running your year, that's a priority. So
Exactly.
love those two. So where should we go next? We could get into other two topics here, either technology as a force multiplier or smart goals.
Let's talk about technology. That's the sexy stuff, right? We just talked about
Yeah.
things.
Okay. Yeah. We'll get to that, and then we'll talk about goals after. But yeah, obviously we're you're a technologist. We're building a tech company, but a lot of times I think we can get into technology for technology's sake. So how do you think about making the most impact when you decide on your partners, and kind of the why behind those investments?
Yeah, I'll start by saying this. So first of all, RevOps leaders come from a variety of different disciplines and backgrounds. A lot of them come from strategy and planning, some from field ops, right? That's where they started their career. I actually started mine in tech, right? So I was a revenue systems leader over at ArcSight way back in the day, for instance, right? And so it's always been close, near and dear to my heart to think about technology as that force multiplier. I think you hit it on the head. It's
Hmm.
like, why though? Why does it matter? What are you using it for? And for me, there's really two things. And then I'll speak to some of the ones that I'm excited about, for example. So, number one, look, it's time back, right? It's all math to me, it's all models to me, where like if I can give each seller an hour back in their day per week, I mean, that is a lot of time back per seller, especially at scale. And each
Yeah.
hour, each week, each month that you can give back to a seller leads to more productivity, more time spent in the field. So fundamentally, that's what I'm trying to solve for is reducing
Hmm.
friction internally so they can spend more time out in the field, right? And the second thing I would say is it's also about increasing seller productivity, right? This is a little bit of a platitude at this point, but yeah, revenue is not an art, it's a science. We've known this for a while now. Okay, great. What does that actually mean, Ross? What it means
Yes.
to me is like, can we help with the next best action for a seller? And can we
Hmm.
drive consistency amongst our sellers as well? And both of those things, I think, are done through great technology or can be done through great technology, right? I affectionately say this, and truly this is, I'm jesting a little bit, but the SDRs that I had at Cloudera are now the strategic account executives and the regional directors at Snowflake and Databricks. It's like, well, it actually hasn't been that long. And we haven't given them that much training. We have certainly, and they've all done exceptionally well, and I'm super prideful of the same. But it's not lost on me how much we need to continue to invest in our sales leaders and sales
Hmm.
executives so that they can continue to be successful. And this is where I think technology matters. So if I reflect on, say, even what we're doing at LaunchDarkly, right? Like we use a tool called Pocus, which I'm a big fan and advocate of, right? All Pocus is really doing for me, and it goes through a variety of, you can talk about all the data signals and the product telemetry it ingests and how it all comes together with a CDP and a single, it doesn't really matter. What it's really doing for me is helping sellers prioritize what they do first, second, last, and as in which accounts they go after, and then
Yep.
giving them again visibility into the next best action they can take with a given customer or prospect. It's the same thing with Gong. We're platformed on Gong over here, right? So certainly the CI piece is important, the conversational intelligence piece, but more broadly, what is all the information that we can capture from our customers from those conversations and use it to coach, train, and develop our people so they can be even
Yep.
more effective in their ability to prosecute and their ability to drive pipeline from top of funnel all the way through close one. So look, you're right. Technology can be sometimes technology for technology's sake. My belief is like pick two, three key vendors, standardize on them, and then make
Yep.
sure that when you're picking those vendors, that you understand the root variable you're solving for, which is seller productivity and time back to sellers. If you can give those things back to your sales organization, frankly, they'll adopt the tools that you're offering as well, and they will be better off as a result.
Well, yeah, that's kind of was going to be my next question around the adoption, and actually tying back to the cadences and the rituals. What I've seen a lot of the times is it's not that. there's a product failing. It's not necessarily that there isn't the right approach or strategy to the tool, but it's not integrated into the core cadences and operating rhythm, right? So you might go by going, but are you using that in those deal review meetings? Are you using that as those insight calls? So how do you think about, again, not just evaluating the tools, technically integrating them, rolling them out and doing trainings, but how do you think about tying in that technology and those goals to the operating rhythm at the company? Because that's, in my mind, the only real way to drive adoption. Isn't just, giving people nice, like, shiny things. It's how do we really commit to that? Like you're saying, picking a few and connecting them to, how we run the rest of the business.
I think you hit it right on the head. I actually don't think you can do one without the other, right? I don't think you have great
Yeah.
rituals and cadences without great technology. So I absolutely agree with that statement. Um, it's funny. It's the path of least resistance for me. So I'll give you an example, right? So we've all done QBRs till, our whole careers to some degree, right? And I remember early days QBRs were what for me? Man, there's 15, 20, 30 slides you got to fill out and you got to go find all your data and you got to put it all together, et cetera, right? And everyone feels it's a perfunctory exercise and sellers don't like it. RDs use it as report the news sort of thing, right?
Hmm.
Somewhere along the way, I just told my leadership, it's like, I don't want to do that anymore. Can we just like pull up the tools? Can we just pull up our forecasting solution? Can we just pull up Gong? Can we just have that sort of conversation? So you don't need to fill out slides, just use the tools. You're just copy pasting it over anyways, right? And so it's a good example of, well, actually, if the tool is good and great, as long as you've set the proper expectation of like in these rituals, these cadences, as I
Yeah.
like to call them, what questions you're going to ask, what you're trying to answer, and help them understand here are the tools you're going to use to answer it and leave it at that and
Yeah.
don't try to add a bunch of layers of complexity on top of, you'll find that most sellers, are actually hyper intelligent about all these things. They may pretend that they're not, but that's selective, right? But they know how to use all these things all these tools if they know that it is of value for them and it'll give
Yeah.
them time back, space back. So that's the approach I take. And our QBRs, yeah, it's just like, no, I linked us to our forecasting tool. Don't copy paste anything. I linked us to our coaching platform. Don't copy paste anything. And then that makes it easier for them to drive adoption and usage as well. And so it all connects, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Well, you're preaching to the choir, but unfortunately, not every team is like that, right? We work with over 150 B2B customers, and a lot of them didn't start there. A lot of them had the right leaders come in and make that change, and then that's just again the early adopter innovators of the world that are actually investing in newer technology. Curious to hear why you think that isn't the status quo. Like what is holding people back from
Yeah.
making that change, giving sellers time back, using new technology to drive that instead of what I hear all the time, frustrations from sellers and their leaders, most of all, of saying, we're going to spend these few days, we're going to fly out and we're going to do things that aren't field facing. And there's going to be so much prep work and it's going to, not fire up my team and energize them. It's actually going to slow us down. So why is that the status quo when, you're saying this and I'm nodding along, it seems to make so much sense. What's stopping, the 80% of teams that aren't doing that from getting
Yeah.
there today?
So I have strong opinions on this, so I'm glad you brought it up. So one, I think people don't challenge the status quo, Ross, right? So how often have we just said, oh, we're doing this because it's always what we've done, right? And that happens at a macro level, right? Within the overall revenue landscape, certainly. Like we've always done QBRs, so we will always do QBRs, for example. Don't know if that's always a good idea, but it also happens within companies as a microcosm, right? A company's typically launched has been around for 10 years, for example. And then most companies I've been a part of, they're around for a long period of time. They've become forever companies, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they have all these things that they've already built in, institutional knowledge and expectations, right? And it becomes harder and harder to challenge those the longer that folks have those entrenched, right?
Yeah.
And so this actually brings me up to actually, it's a good segue into like the third thing that I care most about, which is, and I called it SMART goals. But really what I'm saying is that, look, the job of operators, but across the board revenue leadership is constantly to be iterating on what is current state and status quo through intentional initiatives,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we do owe it to ourselves to have a quarterly assessment at minimum to say, well, what's working, what's not working, establish what's not working, and usually it's things like QBRs or something we've been doing for a long time, the same way, et cetera. and
Mhm.
then build an initiative around it to say, okay, here's how we're going to make it better. Not enough organizations think this way. And if I may, the way that I try to break this down is, look, there's corporate objectives, right? This is the like OKRs of the world, and it's usually product centric and something big, bold, and great, right? Got it. There's your run the business objectives, right? You got to be able to do your forecasting every week. You got to be able to manage the business, close deals, etc. Most companies think about those two things.
Mhm.
What they don't think about is this middle group, which is called departmental objectives, as I like to call it, right? What's that thing that your department cares about that it needs to make a step function improvement on this quarter in order for your business to get better, right? Um, I would encourage everyone to establish those departmental objectives every quarter, articulate initiatives against them, and put
Mhm.
SMART goals against them as well, right? SMART goals being specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and time bound goals. And if you do that, what you're going to find is that these like perfunctory activities, these things that we've always been doing for the sake of doing them, quickly you'll suss out that they don't work, and
Yeah.
quickly you'll have an answer for what's better, and then you'll keep iterating on them. It was like the old adage, just most people overestimate what they can do in a quarter and underestimate what they can do in a year, right? Same
Yeah.
thing here. In a year, you'll look back and say, ah, all right, we changed and veered away from those established norms into something that's bigger, bolder, greater. So that's a long-winded way to say, Ross, I agree with you. It's all entrenched thought, but can you build the muscle memory in an organization to constantly challenge it, and build clear initiatives to address those issues so that you can make progress against them?
And who should be driving that? Because I think a lot of the times what I see is, I mean, to put it candidly, like weak leadership. It's like
Yeah.
there isn't a person that can come in and point in the right direction, say, everyone, this is what I'm hearing from everyone, this is what we do. Because people sometimes don't have the confidence, they don't want to shake things up,
Yep.
and they're worried about it. I think the leaders that I see at the companies that we work with that people are fired up about are the people that actually have those big, bold changes to the status quo. So curious to hear kind of your, thoughts on who should be driving some of that change from the top.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would actually break this up into two buckets. So one, I would contend that most organizations have the big idea folks in them, right? So I sit around and talk about all the things we should do all the time here at LaunchDarkly, and I've got plenty of other leaders that do so as well. Most organizations have some of that, right? I think going from theory to practice is what is hard.
Well, having the confidence and conviction to not just have the ideas, but like, I'm going to put my name against this thing. It's going to be resource, it's going to be materially changing what
Yeah.
we're doing today. That's where I feel like there's not a lot of those folks out there.
So the way I've approached this, which has worked really well for me, is I believe in a difference. I believe in this notion of what's called a DRI, a directly responsible individual. And the
Yeah.
thing is, a directly responsible individual actually is rarely the executive that
Yeah.
had the big great idea. It's usually somebody in your org that you think is like, hey, this person is got upside potential. They're a 10xer. They have the ability to grow and in their career here, and they're humble, hungry, curious. Great. That person you need to dictate as you are the DRI. That does not mean you do everything, by the way. That just means that you can capture hearts and minds across the organization. You can bring people along on this initiative and get multiple parties to work together to execute. If you have that established, that individual and that
Hmm.
expectation established, what I find is that you'll come up with 15 different ideas. Executives are professionals at coming up with the next great idea. These DRIs will take them all, synthesize it down, and say, here are the five that matter, Curran. And then from there, they will take it from soup to nuts. They will take it to closure with you being the escalation point to say, hey, Curran, I'm blocked here, there, and elsewhere. When you have that in place, I think that makes a big difference in driving to the execution that you're looking for. I think the misconception is it is all top down. Hey, there's somebody that needs to have executive sponsorship and therefore and thusly things will change. Actually, the opportunity, the goodness comes from the bottoms up, right? So
Yeah.
find those winners, find those leaders in your organization that aren't executives, that aren't at the top of the food chain, so to speak, and give them this. They'll be better off for it as well, right? They will have career growth as a result, not just from a promotional standpoint, but from a learning standpoint as well.
So yeah, and I think it's that delegation of the authority and the resources that I feel like sometimes is missing. I like, again, we'll have this great idea. Hey, go off and do this, but like, do all those other stakeholders and teams that need to be involved and resources that they need to capture, do they feel like they can get those? And that's sometimes where I feel like these things, we talked about, rolling out new technology. Someone has a great idea, leader has this great idea how we're going to drive competitive wins or something like that. Hey, go off and solve this. Well, do they have the delegation of kind of that senior leaders, and they're not going to do it, right? You're saying like, yeah, they're running off doing all their own stuff, but do they have the power from that person to go off as a DRI? I feel like that's sometimes the missing link that I've seen. And then the thing falls short and they're like, why didn't this happen? We're like, well, this person said no. And this person, it's like, oh, why didn't you ping me? Well, it's like, usually that's where I think a lot of the time it falls short.
I would agree.
Awesome. Well, maybe before we wrap, I'd be curious to get your take again as the more unique guest here coming from the RevOps space. What do you think the most common misalignment is between sales leadership and revenue operations? And maybe a tip on how to solve that.
Yeah, I would actually contend that the misalignment is for sales leadership and revenue leadership broadly, because revenue operations obviously covers a bunch of different buckets at this point, is knowing what RevOps can do for you and who and what is RevOps. So tell me if you haven't heard this before. A lot of organizations use us as like a reactive vessel. Hey, can you build that shiny purple button for me? Oh, they're really Salesforce admins. Oh, they're really just building out comp plans. Actually, no. What I encourage and remind my leadership team all the time is, look, RevOps is the connective tissue and the prioritization engine across the revenue org. And the way that we hold ourselves accountable is through the KPI of seller productivity. So what does that actually mean? That means that our job is to help you understand how to say no to good ideas for great ideas. So that's the conversation we need to have. Our job is to help you figure out the right handoffs between the different parts of the organization so we give our customers the best outcomes. So if you look at us as that strategic partner that can help you with these things, because guess what? We've been doing this all day, every day. While you've been out there closing deals, we've been thinking about your sales process the entire time, right?
Yeah.
If you let us be that counterpart to you, be that sort of practitioner that you can pressure test ideas with, not solutions, but problem statements and ideas with, I think you get the most outcomes out of that organization. So I would say mostly elevate the conversation if you're a sales leader, and you'll be surprised by how much you get in return.
Yeah, that's a great takeaway for today. But no, this was fun, from rituals and cadences to how to really think about technology partners. And I love what you said about focusing on a few, because I think still, despite the conversation around consolidation, I still see really bloated tech stacks, and then how to set the right goals. So this was a lot of fun, and thanks so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us.
Appreciate it. This was fun for sure.